Monday night, and welcome to Graphic Policy Radio, the podcast where comics and politics meet. This is the show for folks who know that the only solution to living in the darkest timeline is standing together, with or without Kitty Pryde, time traveling through the time stream to get involved in the process. This is your host, Ilana Levin, a.k.a. Ilana Brooklyn, and tonight we're covering Season 2 of Legion, the FX show, which is nominally X-Men-based prestige television. It gave us a lot to talk about. And last season, from mental health to, and this season we're talking about mental health, memes, retro aesthetics, a lot of different topics. And Leonardo, who was my guest last time around, was such the perfect guest for us to talk Season 1 that I knew we had to have him back for Season 2. So, Leonardo, welcome to join us again. I just realized I forgot to ask you how to pronounce your last name, so run that through me one more time.
Yeah, you know what? I usually just say Fairman because that seems to be the simplest. It's fireman in Hebrew, but Fairman is functionally what I always hear, so I don't really mind either way.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, for your biography, Leonardo was born in Buenos Aires, raised in Queens. On the playground was where he planned most of his schemes. Since he's plowed a jagged path as a writer, editor, podcaster, comic creator, and mostly benevolent malcontent in New York City, Leo is 1/5 of the long-running podcast Black Comics Chat, 1/2 of the horror podcast The Scream Squad, a staff writer for Screen Rant, film editor for the independent sci-fi monthly newsletter Narazu, and generally has words all over the interwebs, but they're frequently gathered on Twitter at Leonardo EFF. So, hello, welcome back.
Hi, Ilana. Thank you so much for having me again, and thank you so much for having me on this particular subject, which I adore.
Oh, yes. Oh, that's good. And I just want to make sure our listeners know from here on out, spoilers abound. This is for people who've watched Season 2 and are comfortable just talking about everything about it. One of the reasons why I'm doing this episode tonight actually is because my city councilman, Carlos Menchaca, representing Sunset Park and Red Hook in Brooklyn, is a huge fan of the series, and he mentioned his enthusiasm at hearing the show cover it again. So when your city councilman is, I know, my city councilman is totally awesome and endorsed Cynthia Nixon for governor, and it's just a badass. When he's like, oh, you guys are really excited for Season 2, then I said, okay, we're going to have to do another episode about Season 2. So I guess I'll start out by saying, overall, do you feel like the show has maintained its quality between Season 1 and 2? Do you think that the season is better than before? How do you think it's charting?
Interesting. It's such a different monster, and it's funny because I was catching up not too long ago on Atlanta, which is obviously shares a home on FX as well. And I remember I was telling somebody, and I was like, this season of Atlanta is half as funny and 3 times as profound as the first season. The show really kind of changed direction. And I wouldn't use the exact same words to describe Legion, but the tensions, the intentions, the concepts that the show is passionate about pursuing are so different in Season 2 to me. In certain ways, it feels like they're an evolution. I think especially in terms of, I feel like Season 2 approaches a mental illness in even more overt way than even Season 1 did, even though there's mental institution scenes. It just really goes for that. But at the same time, it feels like it's using items in the toolbox that it never pulled out before.
I feel like the big different theme that we have. There's a couple of different themes that we have here that we didn't really have before, but the big one that I feel like is particularly political is the question of delusions and social delusions and how they spread. And I think that this is a season that was written after the Trump election, and I think that the fact that there's multiple voiceovers, science and diagrams and illustrations looking at how bad information spreads, how it's seems to me like a writer who's thinking about how to understand Trump winning the election. There's an episode where they basically are talking about how ideas are being spread, and it was so funny to me because I'm so used to having people talk about that in terms of memes, right? So to see somebody sort of use the traditional description, like the egg sequence with the black chick, the sort of Did you see Twin Peaks? Because the weird inky sludgy chick from the egg in this, I was like, oh, this is like the frog wasp from Twin Peaks: The Return coming back.
That's interesting.
Possibly somebody will vore it on camera, but like the whole sequence with the egg, I'm like, okay, this is literally talking about memes, and they talk about, can obsessive compulsive disorder essentially be spread as a meme? And, the question of delusions and growing and spreading on a single idea. And I think when you think about bad ideas like lies and social contagions, like the whole notion of the birthers, who said that, Obama was not an American citizen, they used the fact that America racism default understanding of the world always is going to see people who have non-Anglo-Saxon names as being foreign in some way, and is always going to see people who are black as being other, period. We're already going to look at President Obama through a lens of him being an other. So choosing a contagion that was claiming that he wasn't actually a citizen was, going to be a particularly sticky lie, a particularly easy to spread lie. And that sort of is a contagion that, Trump came into political prevalence off of promoting birtherism, right? So
right.
I just really think that metaphor is really what this season is focused on, to me, most of all.
That's really, I would even elaborate on it further. The idea that the particular circumstances that the group, now with Division 3 are in, puts them into this like position where they're sort of vulnerable to the ideas of delusions more so than they were before. And similarly, I would position that's a description of much of this country at the point of the last election as well. And the spooky shit, and I don't want to go to Internet Rule 13 or whatever the hell it is, but the whole idea is that was also the same state that Germany was in prior to World War II. It was just sort of like beaten up and primed for a kind of an infectious concept, an infectious and lethal and dangerous concept to sort of like take hold in a way that looks like it's like it you think it couldn't possibly have been like planned for like years and years in advance, but the conditions are so perfect. It feels planned. It feels designed in some way. And that's sort of how I felt like we've been, even though that's a really pessimistic overview of us, but it feels that way.
I think that like he's interested in having us like question, the source of our beliefs. And it's so interesting to see somebody do that in a story that has very few traditionally political moments. I mean, it does dumb stuff like they totally have a both sides do it moment in one of their various science movie diagrams of how bad ideas are spread. And it's like, no, guys, only one side are Nazis. The other side are not Nazis. But which I guess sort of shows you again, like how this is like this sort of a very much more interested in political theory of how things function and less interested in the content of what those ideas are. But this season felt like it was all about that. And
what do you think of it plot-wise? Like, what do you think of the structure of that, of like the narration asides? Like, were you game for that? Did you feel like I was personally a little upset by it just because I kept wanting it to be contextual and it never was? It's just magical.
Yes. Agreed. Too many times. You can't just keep doing it. If either they should have done it like every episode as, like this is the musical segment and this is the science television segment, or you have to do it less. I think it used it too much as a shortcut. Right. And they felt like they couldn't just keep going back to it as much as they did. I'm also going to say I felt like the middle of the season dragged. It might have had to do with the schedule within which I watched the show anyway, perhaps. But for me, I felt like the mid-season really dragged. And even in episodes that dragged for me, there's always some visually striking images that you're just really happy that you saw. This show is still art directed to bejesus and back. But I did feel like the middle of the season dragged for me. Did it drag for you?
I have to somewhat agree in certain ways. Like, it dragged for me. It started to drag for me a little bit until there was the Sid episode, which I was just sitting straight up in my seat for. And then I sort of like fell again like a bit. Like it. I mean, part of it is it felt like it took its sweet ass time in a lot of ways. And then when it sort of had its eye on the prize, it's like, no, okay, now we know where we're going. It went there pretty briskly, all things considered. But I did feel like around that Sid episode, it was dragging a little bit. I thought the same thing.
Let's talk about the Sid episode a bit, because that is one of the things that I have a lot of thoughts on in terms of political and social analysis. That because I agree that episode was really interesting. I mean, the show is increasingly, spending more time with her. To me, like, the Sid episode is even more important in light of the conversations she has later on with Melanie Bird. I mean, Gene Smart's character, if a show has ever used hair and costumes to communicate points about a character, definitely the falling of Melanie's bouffant is a great symbol for her becoming more disheveled in her mind. And, eventually we learn she's been infested by Farouk. But I was like, oh, she's really losing it, and her hair shows it, because that was some impeccable, impossible to maintain hair that she'd been maintaining there. So I understand that she couldn't maintain it, like, in the face of having a mental illness moment, frankly.
Does she get it back at the? Am I crazy?
Nope.
No, she doesn't.
Her hair is styled better, but it's not the full level of meticulous bouffantiness from a magazine as before. So in the beginning of the season, it's completely messed up, and then at the end of the season, when Farouk is manifesting her, well, except for there's the moments where she and Oliver are in that ice cube in their minds. That's offside. That's all in her head. But I mean, but in the show, her hair gets more polished, but not to the level it was before. But so Melanie's conversations with Sid, both before and then after that, really focus on, the things that we do for our men and how women put their lives on hold to follow the dreams that their boyfriends or husbands have, and how women become like subsumed in their partner's dreams and stuff. And what's interesting is that, every time Melanie makes this point, Sid is like, okay, that might be you, but it's not me. That might be what happened to you, but that's not what's happening to me. And the thing is, to us as a viewer, we still have been predominantly looking at everything as being David's story. And, Sid is a very active character in it. She's certainly not a damsel in distress, but she's not the protagonist. So what I think here is that Sid is rejecting Melanie's analysis of her just following their man's dream, because Sid, is very much in the belief that she is the protagonist of her own story. And that's definitely, a very modern woman perspective on the story. But if you've been growing up consuming, older media, the assumption that you were going to have is that the woman isn't the center, and that even if we're not seeing it predominantly through her eyes, she's just there as a supporting character. So I think the fact that, like, we get more we have a whole episode that is just Sid-centric this season, for example, and we do have more from her in general. Like, she's not a full she's not a full protagonist. She's still only the secondary protagonist, but we're getting more of her in that, which is sort of how Sid believes that, no, this is her story. She even has a moment in the second to last episode where she's like, no, actually, I'm the hero. And it felt to me like that's something that you would say in a story in which the male character was the hero, is you have the woman say, no, actually, I'm the one who's going to do it. And it's like this badass moment, but you're like, again, this only makes sense because we're all assuming that the man is still the hero.
Huh. But doesn't it sort of muck things up, the idea that this conceptual future Sid is a primary active person who is trying to change shit, like the other self-movers?
Yeah, but again, yes, exactly. She's definitely an actor. She's definitely
like, she has agency. It's just not her. It's not exactly her, but it is her.
But also, like, that might be Amal Farouk, right? Like, it's hard to know.
I thought that at first, but then considering how developments occur, and then considering the conversation that Sid has with Farouk, made me think, like, it can't be, because what is he doing? Talking to himself? Like, that obviously was like a direct experience that was had off-site that no one else got to witness, at least for most of it. So, like, I don't I don't know. I don't think that's 100% clarified, to be honest. But it's interesting because that let's call her the Sid with agency, the future Sid with agency, is actually a weirdly a weirdly positioned character of which Sid is jealous of. Like, she's envious of the Sid that she is, that has agency, that is trying to change things. So that's sort of interesting that the present timeline Sid has jealousy, which was perhaps well-founded, as we later discover, but does have like these feelings of jealousy because maybe she also sees something, she admires something about the fact that this is a Sid who's trying to change the world.
Oh, that's interesting. I did feel like they were initially going to play into the whole jealousy thing more, and I was so glad that they didn't do more with it because I have zero interest. I have zero interest in watching women be jealous of each other, and I have even less interest in watching women be jealous of themselves. But you're like, to the extent that is a part of the show, I definitely agree with your take on it. I was just sort of like, oh, thank God they're not going to do that too much because I would definitely lose my mind. I mean, ultimately, like, this is still a show about men fighting for control of everyone else's minds over and over again, and who's going to get to control everyone's minds.
Right, a fight between two man gods.
Yeah. I mean, and like the torture scene near the end was, like when you're questioning, like, when did he become Oliver? Why was Oliver going along for it as long? Everything. Yeah.
No, well, it's like, what you were saying before about Melanie, you had me thinking about something, about this idea that part of like Melanie's character journey also regards her romantic evolution with Oliver, which is that, in season 1 there was weirdness, right? Like, there is that rediscovery, but Oliver is somehow disconnected from their actual history, and that's probably because like he's just been locked in that what do they call it, the
ice cube.
Yeah, but I thought it had a name, like the ether or something. I forgot the name of it. But like, he's been there so long that his brain is kind of like turned to mush and needs to be beaten back into shape. So like, he's not really connecting with Melanie in a way that's satisfying, and it's really palpable. Like, Melanie's sort of like, oh my God, Oliver's back, and he's like, oh, you're my wife? I mean, I guess that's okay, and it's just, they're not really communicating. And then right at that point, he's taken. So it's like, Melanie is this woman who's been sort of reserving her sense of love for this, like, misbegotten thing that she finally gets back and is dashed in her face, whether by Oliver's like, own choices or not is irrelevant, but that's what happens. So it's like, then she, it turns into herself and gets into addiction and becomes a sort of different person as a defensive measure against that. And it's like, what we're talking about before about the delusion concept and the delusion interstitial narrative stuff, it's like, well, Melanie is in the perfect position to have Farouk mold her mind to do something else at that point, because she is sort of finished with Oliver. So it's like, that was always, I don't remember all of the delusion narrative vignettes, but the one that I feel like connected the most and seems thematic throughout every episode is this idea that delusion that you find, like, there's a reason it takes hold. Like, there's a vulnerability and an openness to that delusion that you betray. So yeah, it's sort of like, because there's this thing about like, well, Farouk controlling Melanie or not, and it's sort of like Melanie was like ready to be controlled. Like, she was ready to be taken in that way. She was sort of in a strong position for it. And
that's so heartbreaking, because when we're introduced to her in season 1, I was like, look at this completely badass, self like contained female leader who's like this completely untouchable femme goddess who's just running this agency, and she's doing it and her hair is perfect. And this is like an archetype you don't really get to see much of. And the next thing you know, they're like, oh, actually she's running this mission at the behest of her really awesome dude husband. And, obviously she's someone who is seen as being very competent at that. But then as soon as that gets shaken, it's like, I don't know. I don't like what I don't feel like the take on Melanie this season has been very feminist at all. And I think that the dialogue between her and Sid has been interesting in the sense of I've seen that dialogue, intergenerational dialogue between women before, but I think that they did not do good things to Melanie's character, and that kind of sucks.
It's such a good point, and I'm betraying my shitty maleness, but I guess I haven't really asked myself that question. Is Legion season 2 sort of preoccupied with vulnerable femininity? And I think it might be, now that we're talking about it, and that is distressing, because I mean many of the women, save maybe Carrie, although Carrie is shaken. She's shaken in season 1 too, but she's really shaken.
Really shaken in season,
yeah. She's still pretty tough, but I may have to reevaluate a couple things about the show.
My question also is what does it mean that when the Carries get switched and female Carrie is stuck on the outside? It makes you really think about here you have this female character who's really only living half a life, and she that's what she chooses, but it's sad to think about when he does die, she probably will die too, and she'll only have had half a life to show for it. And it's, quote, the interesting parts as opposed to the boring parts, as she puts it. But I don't know. It's a bit troubling. I do really enjoy her fight scenes. Were really excellent here, of course, as always. And the dance scenes too. There's such a good physicality in the cast. They can really move.
No,
what did you think of the dance fighting? What was it early in this, season 1? Episode 1.
I did not even know what I was getting into, and I thought it was actually fantastic. I feel like those heavier fantasies sort of receded as the season went on, and I missed them a little bit because I was sort of getting into them. And that one is that's a particularly audacious one that I thought was really fun.
Oh, I thought it was a real dance fight.
Yeah.
My note says the dance off is physical masturbation in pursuit of a body, but looking at it now, I mean, but looking at it now, it's just sort of they're dancing, and that is going to be how you determine who has control of the body. The dance supremacy will control that.
Mm-hmm.
So, although talking about dancing, I want to definitely give a shout out for episode 1 sex scene, the body swap sex scene.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm not mistaken, that was the first time that they actually physically have sex rather than having sex mentally, right?
Do they? Wait,
I thought so.
Which specific moment are you talking about?
Season 2, episode 1. When Stables come back, they go into the white room, and the music starts playing, and it's "We Love You" by the Rolling Stones. And I am so happy because for once somebody has used a non-completely generic Rolling Stone song for something. It also happens to be a Rolling Stone song I love. And I recognize that from the second you get the song "We Love You" begins with a bit of room tone, in the actual song. If you go and cue it up, it opens with room tone. And so you actually hear the room tone in the song, and they're in this white room that they've invented in their mind. But so it's a physical room and a fictional room. But I did interpret it as them actually having physical intercourse because they switch bodies during it, right? They do body swap. I mean, while Davis has been gone for the year, Sid has been working on her body swapping skills. We see her swap bodies with a cat, which was wonderful acting and adorable.
Yeah.
I loved it. Oh God, I loved it. So she's been working on her body swap skills in terms of being more comfortable at body swapping. And my read of the sex scene is that they did body swap. So they had sex, and they had sex in each other's bodies, which is I think ridiculously hot. Did you think that they were just having sex in their minds again, or?
Yeah, I thought that was a return, especially because of the way they intro it. It just seemed really dreamy. But what you say makes total sense that they had. I mean, I would almost think that if you have that type of mind exploding sex that you're describing, they probably wouldn't be able to shut up about it for the rest of the season, but they never bring it up. You're yeah, that was really weird, right? Holy shit. But no, that makes total. You've sold me on it. You've sold me on it. That makes
but
total
it also
sense.
makes thank you. But it also makes me think like, dude, you guys could have been having body swap sex. Certainly not this whole time because like you don't want to do that with until you really, really trust somebody. But like they could have been having body sex a little bit earlier, is what I'm saying. And it just makes you wonder if it's interesting because David in the comics has multiple personalities. We don't really know to what extent that's the case here because you see these different parallel Davids in that later episode. You know, like the different possibilities of how his life could have ended up. The one where he's medicated and working in this day job. I wanted, and there's different possibilities. So it's unclear, like, whether or not this David is a David who has multiple personalities. I don't think he does. But it made me think about, like, if a guy with multiple personalities, like, what is his comfort level in terms of being okay with being in somebody else's body, let alone a female body, like, actually inhabiting it, albeit briefly. Oh, well, but I do want – sorry. Mm-hmm.
No. You've got my mind going on overdrive with the sex concept. So, okay, here's a thought. So, like, can we agree that part of this season is about? In the first season, Melanie explains that she explains to David quite clearly, no, we don't actually think you have mental illness. We think that this person lives inside you, and we're going to get that person out. We're going to deal with that. And then season 2 is about, okay, either you do actually have mental illness, or that person being in you for so long has affected you in such a way that you might have, there's something remnant that you need to deal with and process, that the work isn't done, that there needs to be work on your powers, but also work on yourself.
Right.
There's an idea there about well, maybe this isn't explicitly stated as such, but the idea of like a person's brain chemistry actually like affecting their mental state. So if he swaps bodies with Sid while they're having sex, does she experience that as well? Does she experience his physical, mental maladies in the same way? Because so I guess this is a multi-part question. First, do you agree with what I said? Like that this season is sort of like, no, we actually do think that you have shit that you need to work out. It's not just about getting a magic man out of your head.
Yep, I completely agree, and I'm so glad about that because that's one of the things we talked about last, when you were on before. Like, it really matters to me that they're like, you can have superpowers and also be mentally disabled. Like, you can be, these are all possible. You can be all these. And this one, it's very clear. Like, you have a mental illness and also you were being possessed. It's both of those things. Yes, and so no, I think that that's pretty conclusive here, especially by the end of the season. Especially by the end of the season.
Yeah, that's challenging. But yeah, I wonder if there's any of that too. Like that. I mean, that's a sort of like, supernatural intimacy that like, only could exist in a show or comics or something. But like, I wonder what that did about the way that they relate to each other, if so. Because like in season 1, of course, Farouk is in there, but remember, like, there is a thing, I guess what you're talking about with her developing her mutant power and like learning how better to control it. The problem in season 1 is that she can't. So like when she touches someone, it's like, it's like total catastrophic. Like that exchange doesn't just like happen casually. It's like it drives everybody wild and like, throws people off and people black out and all these things. So if in a sense she has been able to like control it with her sense of self-control and her work on her powers, that does mean that she would have like subtly inhabited the mind of someone who's working through some mental stuff, like physically, like his physical brain. And that's a wild thought. I mean, I would imagine with just from what we know about Sid's powers that is something that you wouldn't scrub off real quick. You would kind of keep with you.
That's very true.
That's really interesting.
Well, I have a question about the Sid episode for you, though. What is the lesson that you think that she was really sending him back over and over again to learn? Because I actually started to get exhausted about that.
I know. And I'll be honest, I was not satisfied with the lesson she tells him at all. I didn't hear it and I was like, oh great, like all right, now that's closure. Like I didn't get that. I don't really know if I was agreeing with everything necessarily that David was saying either. But what's this, the way she puts, how does she put the lesson of that of the story about love, about Oh God.
Is it like the love is a hot bath thing? I don't know if that's from that episode.
I think it.
But that doesn't really feel like it fits to me.
No, like I mean, I thought that. Like what I gathered, like, all right, so they keep returning specifically to the museum scene and her watching like, you know, a couple touch. Like, I mean, I thought, and this is like overly simplistic, was this idea of like a young woman who's like, you know, completely isolated by her abilities, like isolated from like the world. Like she's seeing a couple make out on a bench, but in reality, it's like the entire world is a museum to her. You cannot touch anything. You can only look at things. So like in a way that landscape is the one that makes the most sense to her, and that's why that's such a like that's such an image and a sensation that she always goes back to, because that's like I guess being there feels like just like, you know, a poetic parallel to how she has to like live her life, or feels like she has to. And I mean her particular story, and like, you know, what she does with her mom, which was, I thought, really brave kind of, that they tell that story in season 1, if I'm not mistaken. Like,
yes, they do.
That's like verbalized, but it's not actually shown. I was pretty surprised that they actually showed it. And like, to me, that was sort of that was like a great pact of vulnerability, saying like, look, this is like so wrong. This is socially wrong. This is legally wrong. But I need you to like understand this like aspect of me and like my desperation to touch others. So like she was willing to like share that with him, which to me was really affecting. Like I thought that was really beautiful and fucked up. Like, you know, here, like, why don't I show you this like horrible thing that my teenage hormones went and pursued. But it's still all about touching. Like I felt like a whole bunch of that episode was like about that physicality and the absence of it, and what that like, you know, does to a person psychologically. So I don't know. I didn't get her resolution, her thing about the love thing. That did not satisfy me, and I couldn't tell if like, am I just an idiot that the episode's not communicating it effectively to me? I love the episode. I love everything about that episode except for the actual finale.
I am 100% with you on that. Ooh, I'm getting an echo. Are you hearing an echo?
I am currently not hearing an echo. No. You sound singular.
Okay.
Is it because we're talking about jumping into different bodies and stuff?
Yes, that is the reason why. No, it's okay now. It's okay. Although speaking of jumping into different bodies, her power set has a slight, in the sense that she can't just touch people however she wants. It sort of makes you think about Rogue from the X-Men, right?
Of course, yeah.
And the comics have this tendency of, if there's a decent creative team on it, as Rogue is more or less in control of her powers, they'll have her showing more or less of her skin, because, you know, when she's completely out of control of her power, she needs to have her skin completely covered up, or else she'll suck everybody's powers out from like accidental contact. But when she's feeling more confident, like when she's running the Avengers, like she'll have gloves, but she'll have bare arms. So every time I see Sid walking around with gloves on her hands but bare arms, I just keep thinking about Rogue, and like what that symbolizes. And Sid has really switched from a uniform of like long sleeves to this season being gloves with short sleeves. So that's sort of a symbol, I think, for her having somewhat more control than she used to.
Is there a thing, like, I'm sorry to sound like such an idiot, but I haven't read X-Men comics in a bit. I guess like the main difference, aside from like powers necessarily, although Sid seems to take those powers, is like that it's a swap. Like it's not, because Rogue actually like absorbs essence from people. Like she can hurt somebody by like kind of taking too much of them. And Sid doesn't do that at all. Right? Like she doesn't retain anything. She simply exchanges.
Yeah, it's not a one-for-one. They're not, and I mean, really, none of the characters in this are one-for-ones for anybody from the actual comics at all, except for Shadow King, who does seem to be actually pretty much Shadow King.
Right.
But yeah, definitely different. And actually, one of the things I did want to say, like, do you feel like there's anything of the comics in this? Because I kind of don't.
So little. I mean, the main, and I'm sure we must have talked about this in the other time we spoke, but the main thing is that, like, comics-wise, it's just a lot of the show, not all of it, but a lot of the show and a lot of the ideas in it are very Grant Morrison to me, and are even more so this season. So now, like, there are aspects of the show that like really make me think of like, you know, Grant Morrison, like you know, going crazy with like a secret government agency that's kind of bad, but is it? No, it's actually not that bad, but maybe it is, and there are little intrigues going on and all that shit. In that way, it does.
Well, speaking of Grant Morrison, there was definitely an internet theory that was going around that was that Admiral Fukuyama has lots of similar letters in his name to Amal Farouk. Admiral Fukuyama being the admiral who's running Division 3 now, or Division 13 now. And on one of the podcasts, it was Legion, Inside Legion podcasts, one of the guys says that Admiral Fukuyama kind of reminds him of Zorn from the comic, from Grant Morrison's X-Men.
Same shit. I thought the same exact thing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I was kind of surprised on the episode where he takes the basket. Like, I was waiting for it to be Clark. I don't know, some shit. Like, I was like, who is this? Who is this under the basket, really? I was totally waiting for the Zorn moment. Yeah.
But also they give you a flashback, right, of how he came to be involved in the program. Like, you do get to see him briefly as a young man in school, which I thought was interesting.
I mean, you got a Zorn flashback too, you know, in the comic.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I was thinking about that constantly. It just seemed right for that, but that doesn't appear to be the situation at all.
You know, it's very confusing to me. Although one of the things that did bug me, like, it didn't bug me from a narrative standpoint, but did bug me from a political standpoint, was the idea that all of society would have shifted so much over the course of the year David was gone, so that the rebels were actually integrated in Division 3 over the course of a single year. Like, that is not possible. Like, entities like massive organizations don't work that way. You know, I fully believe that the Wolf himself could have had a complete change of heart as an individual because of his experiences. Totally. But the idea that the whole agency and leadership could have completely shifted to be fully integrated within that time is just not. That's not how big entities work. But I get that that's not something that they could have really dealt with otherwise. So, but the new paradigm, the new paradigm of like, okay, now we work for the government and everyone's on the same team now. Team humanity was a little bit elided too. You know,
it's odd. Like, it's odd, but I don't know how it couldn't have been. Like, I don't know how they could have, presented it in such a way that it's not. I mean, isn't it interesting too that isn't David's gone for 9 months, right?
A year.
Oh, he's gone for a year? He's gone for exactly
12 months? I think it's for 12 months, but I think it's 12 months. You think it's 9? You think there's a baby or some such?
Yeah, like some weird thing about him sort of like returning to a womb and then all of a sudden like emerging and everything's different. Like, because there is like this weird sort of theme about emergence in the show. Like, they do a really like clumsy allegory of the cave thing at some point.
Yes, boy. It was like, let me literally physically show you the allegory of the cave.
I mean, it's been many years since I read the allegory of the cave. But like, all right, again, this just speaks to my poor memory. But part of in Plato's allegory, isn't there an idea about captivity? It's not just that they're just sitting there. Or if I'm not mistaken, that the individuals who are experiencing the shadow play on the walls they're not doing it of their own accord. They are shackled there. And then eventually they are released from their shackles, and that's when they emerge out into the world and like the sun blinds them. And in the allegory of the cave that they present in the show, there is no captivity. But the show constantly has these like things about emergence. It's about, Farouk coming out of the hole. It's about David coming out of his captivity, his kidnapping. It's like there's always like this weird thing about coming out of a thing and like facing a realization. But in the way that they tell that story in the show, they don't show them as captives. They're just standing. They're just like they're in the cave, like of their own accord. I am 99% sure that captivity is part of the allegory as it was written.
Okay.
So that's interesting too, if
There's
only because
definitely captivity is an issue in this as well, right? Like you seeing how much Lenny just wants to die without her freedom. Those sequences in the early episodes are amazingly good.
Yes.
And then, Melanie is being controlled. A lot of people are really being captive, and everybody is being watched.
They trap themselves in their rooms. Like they're literally self-captivating. Like they're
oh my
like
gosh,
hiding.
Yes. I also really love that there's something when they first bring home Lenny. When they first bring home Lenny, there's a disorientation room. Like the room that they bring her into for her orientation is literally breaking the walls of physics. So it's an actual disorientation room. That is totally my speed. Like, I didn't roll my eyes at the use of heroin by Velvet Underground. I frequently do, but I was like, no, it's fine. I'll let you guys do it this time. I'm so critical of music cues. It's like, but I was like, I'll give you that. That's fine. I was gonna say, let's talk about. I like that they transitioned from Plato's cave depiction to then sort of a depiction of Trump the narcissist, really, like looking at that, because it shifts right to the the woman, the parable of the woman expressing her opinion, and the other person just saying like, no, it's a duck. I have a solution. I'm not changing my opinion at all. And then eventually when the other person, the man on the internet, seeing their disagreement on Twitter, is a Twitter disagreement, right? Like, so that's referencing Twitter conversation. It's going to be referencing Trump, basically.
Right.
And the man who's watching their exchange tweets at her, "You sound fat," and it's like that was an amazing retort. But because that's exactly the kind of bullshit that trolls say to derail conversations. It's like, we're not going to engage with the material. We're just going to say you sound fat. But when the camera pulls back and you see that the man who said that is himself fat, I was like, guys, can you not be bigots? Like, because then that turns the joke from being a joke about how trolls operate into being a joke about fat people. And that's not a good joke, because that's making a joke about fat people. Like, fuck you. So I was like, you guys really had me until that last, like, they didn't need for it to be, oh, look and see, this guy's fat himself. No, that's not cool. Just to have it be an example of how people are digressing and, doing and attacking people and stuff like that, rather than making it be about whatever. Anyway, hopefully I'm making my point, but.
No, you are. No, it was a weird cheap shot that was like totally not needed.
Yeah, it would be great to not do that when people are watching the show. I also enjoy things. I enjoyed moments though. Like there's this great line where Melanie says, "How do you know you're real?" And Carrie's like, "I'm real because when I hit people, they fall down." And Melanie says, "Oh, cause and effect." I mean, there was a lot. That was a good episode. There was a lot happening in that overall. But there really were like two whole segments of science narration. There was Plato's Cave and this digression of how on the internet, and in the same episode. But they had really great visuals, a number of moments. There's Lenny and the glowing car. Definitely later in the season felt like something out of Repo Man. Number of Twin Peaks moments, right?
Yes. Yeah, no, there's like a bunch. I feel like the overall like feel of it was very like kind of like 60s mod film, very like Antonioni stuff, with like it was like Antonioni and Jodorowsky, like
yes, totally.
Yeah.
For folks who are not familiar with these filmmakers, you should probably go watch their movies now, because they're some of the best. There's a whole sequence where they're sort of looking through the desert and they're just shifting panels on a screen.
Right.
It reminded me of the Instagram app that you use to make a collage. It was like, okay, you're referencing specifically like new tools. But that's what that felt like. It was.
Have they ever done that?
Yeah, no.
In the show,
those
have
panels,
they ever done that?
I don't think
so. They've done that. They've done that in Fargo. They've done the split panels a few times in Fargo, which is also Noah Hawley's show.
I had to quit season 3. I was like, this is really smart, but the amount of fat hatred it had, actually, so this is a theme, I guess, for him, and the amount of, like, I don't think the show is anti-Semitic, but I was not ready to listen to the anti-Semitism of the characters in the show in the current moment. Do you know what I mean? That I basically noped out of the first one of the huge anti-Semitic rants because I was like, you know what, I'm not saying you shouldn't do this. I'm just saying I do not have the appetite to listen to this now. But I definitely see. Yeah. But it's a show that has artistic merit, no doubt. Did you watch Fargo season 3 and all that, or?
I did. I think season 3 is honestly trash, except for episodes 8 and 9, which are 2 of like my favorite episodes of television of like the past decade. And it sucks because like it's hard to sell that to someone. It's like, look, the show's no good, but once you get like 8 is like a absolutely gorgeous, beautiful, poetic, thoughtful. Like it's a full movie, and weirdly, it's directed by the guy. It's the only him. He directs that and the following episode, but it's directed by the director of The Girl with All the Gifts. Very random.
Don't know who that is. Okay.
It was like this brilliant zombie movie with a little black girl at the center. Oh, it's really inspired and great, based on a book by Mike Carey, I believe.
The comics writer.
Yeah, he wrote a novel, and they turned it into a movie, which I think he also wrote the screenplay for. Movie's great. That episode of Fargo is amazing. That's really hard for me to be like, hey, watch 7 hours of like not the best stuff to get to something that's absolutely astonishing. I think overall that season is really bad.
I definitely think, I really think that, you know what? I'm not going to get sidetracked on that. So I have a question for you. What do you feel like about the season's handling of Ptolemy and his character arc?
You know what's messed up? I have actually not seen Solo yet. You've seen Solo, I believe, right?
I have, yes.
So I've heard the thing in Solo. Am I wrong here that that a black woman is put into the ship, is like transferred to the ship's computer?
Oh. No, a woman. The voice actress who's L3, who's this amazing robot who's fighting for freedom for droids rather. The droid, she ends up getting put into the ship. She does not. I mean, she's a droid, and the actress who plays her is white.
Okay, all right. Where did I get that?
But she's a freedom fighter. She's a freedom fighter and there's a black woman. There's a black character, a black woman who gets killed in the movie, and it really should have been the white guy who she's in a relationship with. There was no reason for her to die as opposed to him. Like one of them needed to die, and it could have just been the white guy. So maybe that's what you're thinking of.
That's crazy. Yeah, no, I think in my avoidance of spoilers, I somehow like conflated those two things that happen into one thing.
I see that.
No, all right, because my thought when the Ptolemy thing happened was just that like. It upset me because he's like the most prominent black character in the show. I feel like season 1 does him sort of dirty. Like he's not in it enough. He's so exciting at the start of the season. And I'm like, wow, like this is a character we're going to get into. And then he sort of vanishes for most of it. And I was like, what the hell? Like, and he's just kind of, I mean, he doesn't completely disappear. He just becomes less important. And like that bummed me out because I thought he was I thought his power is super cool. And I was just like, I really want to sink my teeth into this characterization, and then he's gone. And so in this season, I was like ready to get back there. And so when they did this to him, I was like, I mean, it's not erasing him from the show, but I mean, it's never totally described, but the concept is that he's dead and now he's interfaced with that AI.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be able to bring him back in some way. I don't think it's staying there, but I still was like, okay. Bold move there, guys. You're going to marginalize your black male character for a while. Okay.
Right?
But, I'm also bored, and it's finally ended, I suppose, but I was getting bored of Jermaine Clement, of Oliver, being piloted around by Amal. Yeah. I was ready to see him be himself and not just be a vehicle for Amal Farouk.
Yeah, he has that one like sparkling moment where he's just like, I'm gonna fucking kill you or whatever. Like it's like I'm gonna get you, like, or whatever he says. I was really enthused at that moment. I was like, oh, okay, this is really okay. And then that's literally the one moment he has. Other than that, he is sort of just at the at the mercy of Farouk and knows it, and he sort of, I don't know, fights back with a little bit of snark occasionally, but he's still like just doing whatever he tells him to do, and it is sort of tiresome. I mean, that's why like his torture is so bizarre, because like you're watching the torture and you're like, can you get anything out of, like, are you torturing like this captive soul? Are you really going to get anything out of that? Is that going to be ultimately successful? Couldn't Farouk just like be prodding you into hurting Oliver on purpose? Isn't that a potential truth?
Oh, I'm glad that the show takes torture is wrong as a given. That's a nice change from some other television shows. So that's a political point in its favor.
I hadn't really thought about that, but you're right. Yeah, that's not even disputed.
Yeah, and actually another political point in its favor is in this episode where we have David's different personalities living their own lives. You see in his version of him where he's taking medication and is working a day job, when the cops get called on him, all they do is escalate, which is exactly what happens when you call cops on people with mental illness. All they do is escalate. So I was like, accurate. Right. Reminder, folks. That's what happens when you call the cops on people having emotional problems. They only know how to do one thing, which is have fights and escalate things. Take notes. So that was another point there. What did you think of the episode where you see the different options of how David could have ended up, the butterfly effect episode? I liked seeing like the example of him as the white man who can only fail upwards version of his life, really. And how he took over from his old boss, which is funny because there's no reason they couldn't have ruled side by side, right? I was like, oh wait, so she's only his assistant; they're not ruling side by side. That's some white man bullshit.
Right.
But yeah, what did you think of that episode?
I didn't mind it, but I almost want to say that it feeds into your comment about the season dragging. That's like a drag point, just because nothing.
I liked that episode.
I do too, but I do think I think it drags the season. But I know I did like it, even though like I also can't say that I exactly understood it. I almost feel like aspects of it would have been possibly more effective for me if they had somehow threaded them into the entire season rather than focus them into one episode, because another theme in the season is about potential and about is the butterfly effect type stuff, and that would almost be an interesting counterpart to a lot of the things that happen in the season. It's like every now and then maybe like take a dip and see what other David could have been or something. Isolated on its own, it just felt like it was there and gone for me.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask a question that was sent to us by my city councilman, Carlos Menchaca of Brooklyn, for a discussion here, which is David's journey is about returning to his memories, but his mind blocks them from people trying to help him. How does trauma in our lives cause this? I thought that was an interesting topic.
What, like, how are David's traumas really expressed or shown? Have they been like really clearly revealed? They're referred to, and his reaction to his traumas are clearly shown, like when he's using a lot of drugs or getting into like in a very conflicted state. But I feel like the traumas themselves, I feel like we only know the traumas themselves from like the shadows that they've left, more than like, specifically the things he's fighting. We know him from a chalkboard story. We know them from like the idea of what Farouk has been doing to him. So that's the idea that like he's blocking them, like that immediately reminds me of when Ptolemy is first walking through David's memories with him, and he keeps kind of like fussing with things and changing things, and then at some point like he's like, stop doing it, and he's like, what, I'm not doing anything. Like he seems genuine in that he's not doing anything, know, and then that's because the Shadow King is kind of like blocking and messing with them.
Moving. Yes.
It's weird, but in this season there is no Shadow King. I don't think that there's an effective exploration into David's traumas. There's just like the kind of like new things he's doing. And Ptonomy doesn't get to walk through his memories anymore, which is kind of sad.
Well, I definitely feel like I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. I think you're right. Like we don't actually see, looks like we don't see the interactions between him and his parents, right? And like that's one of the main vectors of trauma, right? And we don't actually even see that happening to him. Interestingly, we do get to, which I think. So I think it's like like the trauma is still keeping us from even participating in those memories. Mm-hmm. We do see, not memories of Lenny's life pre this, but we see echoes of Lenny's life and like what she does when she's not in a mental institution or in a disorientation room or being trapped in a 60s hellhole. Oh, I loved that when Lenny is completely controlled by in Amal Farouk's domain rather than in Amal Farouk and David's domain, she's suddenly hyper femme because like that's what he's doing to people, right? He's like, okay, now that I completely own you, you're going to be super femmed up. Whereas David, being not a guy from the 1920s, is more like, sure, she can be, sort of tomboyish. That's fine. Anyway, but we do see Lemmy. We do get to see Lemmy like kind of in her natural element, seducing ladies and discombobulating things and rocking out to Kick Out the Jams by the MC5.
Love that moment.
But we also...
when's the last time you heard that song in a show?
In a show? That's a good question. Yeah, I play it a lot, and it is sort of a song that announces itself, like, and now it's time to kick out the jams, motherfuckers, but it's a very good point. One of my discussion questions I definitely was going to ask is, like, what do you feel like was the best pop culture reference, be it musical cue or otherwise? And then I was going to ask which is, like, the most groan-worthy. So let me ask you, like, what was the best pop culture reference, musical or otherwise?
Let me ponder that for a minute. What was your favorite pop culture reference?
Well, obviously, I was overly excited about the music "We Love You" by the Rolling Stones, but I also think like, my favorite. Yeah, that was. They have references to Labyrinth in the later episode where you see David as an evil king who's taken over the world, and he's playing with that crystal ball basically, and his hair is finally getting vertical, but David's hair being vertical is kind of like Gareth from the Labyrinth, so that's something. But just generally, like me being me, like whatever is the most recent deep musical cut they've made is probably what I'm most happy with. Although this is not official probably, but we started in my household. The Vermilion, the robot ladies, the robot individuals that are cast as actresses and also have mustaches and sort of triangular shaped hair. So we began referring to them as the Tony Iommis because they look like Tony Iommi from Black Sabbath. So you could refer to them as the Tonys Iommi as the plural set, or the Tonys Iommi are now fighting against the Minotaur. The Minotaur looks like he's from a Francis Bacon painting. So there was a lot going on in there. But whenever I see...
The Minotaur. We haven't even talked about the Minotaur. Is it? I mean, it's not. I don't know if it's fair as a pop culture reference, but they mentioned the Shi'ar, which I thought was pretty fucking amazing.
Oh, when?
You catch that?
Nope.
Carrie mentions it when he's looking at a piece of tech, and he's like, "It doesn't look like Shi'ar."
Oh shit! That's wonderful.
Actually, I know that's like the first time I think the Shi'ar has been mentioned in the show. Maybe in a live action, Marvel show. I think possibly. That was like totally wild. I was like, oh, whoa, wait, what? Like, you guys are actually like articulated you guys know the Shi'ar exists? What the fuck? That totally blew me away. It's pretty quick, but it decidedly there. I had to like rewind it to double check. I was like, no, he did say that. Yeah, we got the Shi'ar.
So that was your favorite, let's say for now then.
That kind of blew me away.
What is a groan-worthy pop culture moment that you experienced?
All right. I have to admit, I mean, as much as like I was raised on the beats, I was kind of over the beat, like Oliver's beat stuff. I appreciate it. I love it. I mean, it's obvious. Their beat references are incredibly obvious. They're not like deep cuts or anything like that.
No, that's true.
So like
I
I
literally,
just
wow.
like whatever.
I literally have a note right now that says, Jermaine Clement reciting America by Ginsberg. I kind of wish it went on longer. I see that you're of exactly the opposite opinion.
Unfortunately. Yeah, like, I mean, I always, like, I mean, I feel like, I mean, I need to overstate, like, I mean, I was a poet. I love the beats. I read tons of beat stuff when I was younger. That, like, you know, that was my doorway into drugs when I was like a preteen. But like it's all like it is like it's going to be like, you know, Ginsberg America. It's going to be something like that. It's not going to be, you know, D.A. Levy or something or somebody. It's going to be
right. It's going to be greatest hits. It's very true.
Yeah,
Especially America.
yeah.
Like the fact that the fact that I'm like I know exactly what poem that is a sign of, and I'm not deeply invested in poetry. It's a sign of well, for me, like my most groan-worthy moment was like singing Behind Blue Eyes. Like not only is that the Who, one of the worst songs by the Who, but like using it in that particular context has already been done before. Like it's literally been used for that purpose before.
Right.
One thing that I note though is they have used a number of super basic ass songs that they've had do their own versions of, and you know, usually when a show makes their own version of something or use an obscure version of it, like in this case, there's like an EDM version of White Rabbit, and by Jefferson Airplane. Anytime a show uses White Rabbit, I'm like this close to stabbing them because there are other songs that could serve that purpose. But you know, this is a show in which she literally does, where Amalfa Rook literally baits her and down the hole using a white rabbit as bait, a live rabbit as bait. But the EDM version of it, I was like, actually, I like this. This is kind of cool. I'll let you get past me this time. But when they use this, there's a beautiful Kinks song called "Nothing in This World Can Stop Me Worrying About That Girl," which I feel like is like a pretty well-known Kinks song, but not basic as fuck Kinks song. But they had Dan Stevens record a version of it for this. And I think the reason why they did it, other than just like you get to save money off paying the Kinks money, is but when you're having someone from the cast record it or have an off-brand version of it, it means that you're not thinking, unless you're me and I'm just thinking about this. When you have the covers, it's that it moves the song away from the original singer. So rather than thinking about like this is, you know, Ray Davies talking about how there's nothing in this world can stop me from worrying about that girl, is that it's actually no, this is David feeling it, so it makes it closer to the character, and it makes it less about the cultural reference and more about the song itself. So I think that's why they do it. Also, it saves money.
Yeah.
They've been good covers, though. You know, by and large, I SoundHound them. Yeah.
But now you've got me cooking on something, which again is like this idea of like transference and like swapping bodies. There is a sort of thematic basis for doing a character cover in a show like this, maybe more so than some other shows. Because it's about like swapping bodies, about people living inside other people. There's like inhabitation, if that's a word. So yeah, like I almost feel like they can get away with it more than most. Never thought about that though.
Well, speaking of the Minotaur, let's talk about the Minotaur. That was like completely out of Pan's Labyrinth. The physical way it moved.
Yeah, no, totally Del Toro type stuff. Oh, Del Toro, look at that. I didn't even mean it's a double, sort of a pun.
That is true.
But yeah, no, it was. I don't fully understand the Minotaur. Cards on the table. I don't totally get the presence of the Minotaur, what the Minotaur like specifically means. Like the Minotaur is a physical manifestation of the sickness of the the catalyst, the thing that the thing that
I didn't read it that way, but it could be.
Tell me how you read the Minotaur, because I honestly found it quite perplexing.
I mean, it's basically the dragon, right? It's protecting a Minotaur is always in the maze, so it's protecting this maze. It's keeping the people trapped down there. It's keeping them separated from the folks up above. That's it. I didn't read it as anything beyond that. And why is it a minotaur? Because it's a maze. Why are they trapped in a maze? Because that's where you trap someone. You know.
Right, the minotaur is also, whatchamacallit, a child that you're ashamed of, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like the King Minos puts his deformed son in the labyrinth. Like that's where the minotaur is. And like there is, a lot of stuff about like parenthood and parentage in the show, obviously. And there's also like these weird ideas, which is really just like extra cyclical and fucked up, which is that like Farouk is an adult man who gestated inside David's baby brain. And so he's sort of like David's dad in some ways because he's taught him shit and given him a lot. Except like, he's also inside of him, which is a twisted notion of your father, like, being this fucked up father also living inside you. And now that father's gone. And, I always feel like there's weird father-son crap that goes on between the two of them every time they actually interact. And the Minotaur is like symbolic of a son that you're ashamed of. Yeah.
Dude. Yep. I'm on board with that. That sounds good.
Yeah, it was
I believe.
It was a great design, though. I mean, like visually, I thought it was really, and I love how like it's the reason I'm totally inventing this, but the reason why I really connected it to the catalyst, that is the word. Yeah, I think it's the catalyst.
Yeah, the catalyst.
Thing that makes everybody chatter. The reason why I connected to that is that the Minotaur's in, I want to say episode 1. He's early on, like he's just like in Melanie's room. Isn't there that like weird scene where like he's sort of like off slightly like to the left of camera and then like storming off?
That's terrifying as hell to think about. I do not remember it, but you're probably right. I watched everything very, very spread out.
He's early on, like he becomes obviously like he's used like when they're fighting the disease and when they're everybody's like in their own heads and that like crazy scenario, but he's in there before that. He's like there. It's shown that he's like on the edges of everything, and then at the end he's like he's physically present and like hurting, like he fights the Vermilion, fights the Tony Iommis and all that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, but like I couldn't help connecting him in some way, like he was some manifestation of that disease, but I'm inventing that. Like that's not really written out at all. I just felt like he's in the Division 3 tunnels like for a while, and then he becomes more useful. And then he's in the labyrinth of their mind. He's in that labyrinth as a protector as well later on, and then he's like fighting them to protect his horde. There's a bunch going on with him though. I almost feel like I have to rewatch the whole thing and like think about what that Minotaur really becomes by the end of it. But I do think that there's symbolism there.
Well, I'm definitely getting a lot from that. I mean, there's definitely some broader symbols. Like you have this season, you finally had a real Clockwork Orange visual reference scene, and of course that calls back to them being at Clockworks, right? Being the name of the old therapy place. But another just broad visual theme are these honeycombs and tessellations.
Yeah.
And tessellations is like any combination of shapes that can fit together in a repetition pattern, is really at the center of Muslim architectural design and in the Middle East. Those are the motifs, and you're not allowed to have depictions of any representational art at all in this in the strictest interpretations of the Quran. So you had rather than having sculptures of like angels or fruit or whatever, you would like literally have geometric designs. So I feel like partially it's referencing Amal Farouk himself having the tessellations, in the backgrounds of people's rooms, even in Division 3, like you're whatever it is, you're in their rooms and they have these tessellations behind them. They're always behind Amal Farouk, but often the tessellations are honeycomb. And a honeycomb is a structure that's built by bees, and it's built as it's the bee society. So the tessellation is what holds together the society and the collective action of bees. And so tessellations are how we hold together as in a pattern, how we form a pattern in society. So I think it's a visual motif that's both connecting it to Amal Farouk, like culturally, but also sort of reminding you that we're all supposed to be fitting together into this like flawless web of life, but but that doesn't actually, we don't actually hold together that way. There are actual fractures from it.
But I mean, isn't the whole thing with their room designs that those honeycomb patterns are like perverted in a weird way? Like there are a few that are like all together, and then there's like they're kind of like disintegrated into tiny ones.
Yep.
And it's like it's a very weird, it's very memorable visual kind of thing, which I was honestly always trying to unpack because okay, like so at its face value, I think like, well, they use this motif specifically in the division because they want everyone to kind of be orderly and like like do their job and
to fit
be
together. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. They want the hive.
Worker bees. Yep.
Totally. But then like if they do, then why do they add these weird sort of flourishes to that pattern? Why isn't it just a simple pattern? Why is it like messed up in the way that it is?
Because it can't be maintained. Because of course it's going to fail. So like they're trying, but it's not going to ultimately.
Right. Yeah. There's like that. Every time there was like a scene in someone's room, like my eyes immediately got absorbed by that pattern and the way that it kind of got all messed up. I couldn't like not look at it every single time. It was really distracting. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's it. I guess it's like showing that it's like, yeah, the structure cannot hold.
And speaking of insectish motifs, whenever I look at the compass that David made her, the compass of foreshadowing, as I've named it, that David made for Sid to wear, it looks like a spider's web, don't you think?
Oh, man, you're gonna have to. I remember having thoughts when like I saw the original compass. I'm gonna look. It's in a box, right? It's like a square. Is it in a square thing?
No, it's in like a hexagonal thing, like a spider web again.
Ah.
I think.
It's hexagonal as well. Just so. Like the. That's interesting. Huh.
I'm double checking.
I know. I why isn't there like a more obvious? Why didn't someone just like upload 15 images of the compass? I do not see it. That's really okay. This is going to bother me. All right. I have to pull through the visual apps. It opens though. It's like a device that opens.
It does have a compass in it. Yes.
Yeah, and so you're saying that like. You're saying like that, like the gift was supposed to sort of like refer to something insectile.
Yeah, it's a spider's web, so it's also like she's been caught in it. So he's catching her. He's giving her the compass so she can always find him.
Right.
But he's catching her because it's a spider's web. She's trapped by it.
Right. That also perverts the whole, like that line in season 1, which is like really kicked in the face near the end of the season about getting lost together. It's like, yeah, that would sort of further emphasize like how it's not about getting lost. It's about like him sending her to where he wants her to go, which could be to him. It's useful. Yeah, I'm like. Are we going to talk about like the end? Are we going to talk about
let's talk about the end. Let's do it. What do you think?
Do you read Valiant comics?
Valiant comics? Not much.
Yeah. All right. So like the thing that immediately like sent me to is that in Harbinger, which is like one of the foundational of Valiant, both old Valiant and new Valiant, one of the main characters is Peter Stanchek, who is very much a Legion type. He is like he's not schizophrenic and he doesn't have MPD, but he does have like he's like one of the most powerful psiots. So he has all these like he can control people's minds and stuff. And he's like a bullied, sullen young teenager, and so he actually uses his powers to essentially rape this girl, Chris. That's never shown explicitly in the comic. It's clearly referred to, and he's at the time is like doing a lot of drugs and is a very damaged person, and he eventually like realizes what he's done, and she has to like go through therapy and go through a lot of work to kind of like figure out what happened, decide if she wants to forgive him or not, decide what she wants to do with him, because now he wants to like come help her, and it's very messy and complicated, as it should be. And there's always this sort of like thing with him because he's positioned first as a hero, but when this is given to you, like that's immediately like, you know, thrown into disarray, if not outright automatically rejected. Like a rapist cannot be a hero, like period. There's no real, you know, there's no fable way to get to that. It doesn't work. So
and
like,
yeah, and he does in this, like at the end of the season, he has sex with her while lying, basically.
yeah, he does.
So
he does something to her.
Well, he makes her believe that the bad experience that she had did not happen, and they have sex on false pretenses. So he basically raped her. Right.
And I mean, he also like, you know, like figuratively raped her just by like fucking with her brain, which I don't think is something he ever does. But that's interesting, right? Because earlier in the season, he does that a bit in the season with other people. He gets in people's heads for like, and like, you know, in season 1, I want to say usually what he does is more sort of physical, you know, like he throws people around or like, you know, kind of, you see like at some point in the season he also explodes them, but he doesn't like, you know, get into their circuitry. And in this season, like he does that like after they go through like the whole after they go through their mazes, their interior mazes, like he does that thing where he kind of like touches people's heads and does, you know, fixes them in some way or takes out the delusion. That's like him getting up in their wires, and like he never did that before, and he gets up in Sid's wires, which is itself like a rape. Like if anything, the person that he professes this love to, that should be someone that he's never willing to do that to, for anything, even just like, you know, memory erasure or anything like that. You would assume or hope that that's not ever going to be a choice that he makes, and he made it. I mean, I personally really liked the way this season ended, as much as I hated what his character did, and you know, in ways like I loathe his character. But I think it's like the ending the show in this way is painting themselves into such a detailed corner that like they're going to have to really come up with some shit to get out of it. And I'm sort of down to see if they can rise to the challenge. So I enjoyed it on those terms, but I mean, it was hard to watch. I thought it was pretty tough to work through, because I feel like I spent a lot of this season trying to figure out if I thought he was a hero or not, trying to figure out who I believed that they really thought he was the villain or not. And I almost feel like the show is telling you, no, he is the villain. Yep. There you go.
I think that you also see like the Shadow King successfully manipulate everyone, right? Like he's manipulated Melanie, he's contaminated that. He's just really he's won. This is the end of the season. He's won in like every single way, really.
Yeah.
And people are taking him. And people are taking him as being real, you know. So like, what is the delusion? Is the delusion that David deserves love? Is the delusion that Farouk is the good guy? Yeah, the delusion is that Farouk is the good guy. But also in the context of what he just did, I mean, you know, he definitely thinks he deserves love, and he's not actually acting as an honest person in that way. And you know, until that point, I'd actually had a lot of tolerance and patience for David. You know, I really appreciated the movie was showing, like, he has superpowers and he also has mental illness, and you could have both of those things. And certainly, like, Amal Farouk did trigger the bad things that David has done this season through his manipulations, but having sex with having sex with Sid after like erasing her mind so that she wouldn't be angry with him is just freaking rape, because he knows he did that because she wouldn't want him if she knew the truth.
Right.
So that seems like that's on him, and that's not on Amal Farouk.
There are multiple times though in this season that David lies. No.
Yeah, but there's lying and there's lying, you know.
There's a difference for sure.
like this was lying because he knew she wouldn't want to be with him if she knew the truth or if she knew what happened.
Right. Right. No,
Although we could say, like, actually, no, he didn't actually torture Oliver, so therefore he's doing it without her consent to remove it from her mind. That's it.
Right. Right. And I mean, it's also like, we almost don't have to come up with more reasons why it's fucked up, but it also like just shows like how little he trusts her, that like he can't express himself to her and like feel affirmed. So he like resorts to something like this, which is, you know, bad in both directions. So, but I feel like there are multiple points in this season where he's not telling everybody the whole truth about things, and that was the stuff that first started to communicate to me that something's wrong with David. Like, I think something is wrong with him. Like he's pursuing like a route to an end, totally based on like his own like concepts of justice and what he wants to happen, and they are dismissive of his like teammates. Like, I mean, I feel like there's a bunch of this season where he's just totally like, what other people plan to do is utterly irrelevant to him. He is like, you know, following his own like threads, and the more, and like he just kept doing stuff like that. And the more he kept doing that, I was like, well, you know, that's like, he could explain all these things to them. Like, he could actually stop and be like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. But he chooses not to, and that made me start to be suspicious of him. So when it kind of like resolves here, it that made sense. Like, that journey, I was like, oh, and now he's here.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it. So we're coming up on an hour 30. We should probably wrap. Do you have? I was glad that they brought back some animation this season. A couple different episodes. I'm all for there being more animation. What are you looking? What are you looking forward to? Like, what would you like to see the show doing in the future?
I mean, I'm ready for David as the villain.
I'm
ready to see.
And
I'm ready
Sid,
to see what that looks like.
Sid is the hero.
Yeah. Yep.
And if anybody says that that's just playing into stereotypes for people with mental illness or villains, I would like to point out that Sid very clearly has OCD, right? So he can be the hero with a mental illness, and he can be a villain with a mental illness. But, you know, we see like a lot of behaviors from Sid in the flashback. So Sid doing things that are just, you know, very normal things that OCD's person would do. So she can be our hero who has a mental illness and is a hero anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
because remember, I was disappointed when it turned out that there was a reason why she didn't like to be touched. I thought it was like a cool thing, like, yeah, she doesn't like to be touched, and that's okay, and that's her personality trait. And then it's like, no, actually, it's because of her powers. And I said, that's disappointing. So now her like personality difference can be like she doesn't want to be touched because she actually is trying to control her powers, but also she has OCD, and that's okay. So
no, that's what a great thesis about the show is that like they've proven a few times here that they're not relying on powers as a shorthand for mental illness. Like it seems like they might be headed in that direction, but then they don't go there. So yeah, it's really true. That's a continued strength of the show.
Indeed. Yay.
Yeah.
So, if you have any final thoughts, or
I'm trying to think. No, we talked about Pete Stanchik. You should read New Valiant, Lana. You should.
I should read New Valiant. Okay. Yeah. No, the art always looks super strong on those books. They definitely spend money on the art division. But I guess to put a final point onto City Councilman Congressman Chaka's question, like, I think the show is still showing us so much of how David's worst memories, like you said, are blocked out, that we can't even see them or engage in them. I think it shows how extreme that can be, that even into season 2, we don't always see it. And I think that, it definitely means that it's things we should ask ourselves about. How are we going to be able to share the things that happen to us in conversations with people in a healing context? But I also don't want people to go into the whole false memories, hysteria that was a huge issue in the 80s.
Oh, yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, no, we don't want that, especially on a show that wants to tackle delusion. Oh, I just got hit with something. You know what? You know what I want. You know what I want from the next season. You know what I want to see. I want to see at least one episode or a character that explores this idea that I feel like Grant Morrison himself also loves to explore, but this has been in lots of comics by lots of different people. I would like to hear the story of some of the division employees, like the soldiers, like the young soldiers that they employ at first because they're immune to the disease, or the older ones. Like I remember a really memorable aside in The Invisibles is when like there's a issue that's all about like one of the kind of enemy blank soldiers that all the main characters in the book like gleefully murder all the time, and it was like an entire perspective from their point of view. I would like to see that because like that's some of like the most comic stuff in the show is that like these people just get like evaporated and turned into a blood mist and they're just gone and we never think about them or know their names. I would like to know a little bit about at least one of them.
I like that. And I would also say to listeners who are in this for the show and aren't as much comfortable, you should probably check out The Invisibles, guys. I think that Grant Morrison's run on the new X-Men and Grant Morrison's work on The Invisibles are definitely comics the folks should check out if they're interested in this. Any other comic suggestions for folks who are fans of this series?
Like Grant Morrison. Yeah, like The Filth can go along with The Invisibles too by Grant Morrison. I would say Jodorowsky comics, perhaps also. Gosh. Yeah, at least for some of the visual themes and stuff. Although he's more kind of he really likes sexual assault. That's always like the thing I've always found about his
struggle with it so hard myself because as a fan who's also like, I'm really enjoying this highly problematic stuff that was made a long time ago.
Yeah. He did like note that if you're gonna ever dive into it, like a lot of his stuff includes that. But I mean, he's really that doesn't block me out of his material, but it is something you should know going into it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Leonardo, for joining us. I feel more positively towards the series now, having spoken with you about it, than I did coming into this, where I was still a bit bitter over the drag and also how I haven't been able to watch any Luke Cage at all in my scheme to catch up for this. Like in season 2, I've watched season 1, obviously, but I haven't watched any Glow yet. I haven't seen any Pose. All because I'm like, I got to do this second season podcast with Leonardo, and I'm going to keep my city councilman happy. But I feel better about the show now having talked about it. So I'm looking forward to having future conversations. Where can our listeners find you on the internet?
You can find me at Leonardo EFF on Twitter. And yeah, like we said at the top, I co-host Black Comics Chat. Scream Squad is coming back, so I'll be on that soon. I'm all over the internet. I just had an article on Sci-Fi last week for the film Sorry to Bother You, which is magnificent. So yeah, you can find me around.
Oh, I want to see that movie so bad. Oh, I'll look forward to reading your review. That looks like probably the best movie of the year, I'm going to guess.
My favorite film this year so far.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you, Leo. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for having me, Ilana. Take care.
So to our listeners, we'll be back next week on Monday. We might have an episode between now and then talking about the first issue of Captain America. Ta-Nehisi Coates is now writing Captain America. Thank freaking God. We very well might have an episode discussing that new issue between now and Monday. And if not, I will see you Monday, where we'll be joined by Teenie Howard, who's a comics writer who actually was writing an upcoming story in the Captain America Annual that's not going to be out yet till the fall, but who is going to be on the show on Monday to talk about her new series, Assassinistas, as well as Euthonauts, which is launching very soon. She's doing some really awesome punk rock comics, and she was on earlier the show before to talk about the Skeptics. So excited to have her back again. So those are things you have to look up to on the show. Again, this is Graphic Policy Radio. You can find me, Ilana Levin, online all the time at Twitter, basically. Ilana_Brooklyn. That's Ilana_Brooklyn on Twitter. GraphicPolicy.com is our website. You can get full episodes there on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. You can get the whole Graphic Policy podcast episodes that way, as well as last year's Season 1 podcast about Legion. And I just had a review of Multiple Man issue number 1 over on the Comics Beat I'd like for folks to check out as well. So till next week, to a rally, talk to somebody you know about how they have to make sure they're voting in the off-year election, and keep it geeky.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.